The end times are coming, folks, and Tucker Carlson knows it. He's rediscovered his Christianity. Honestly, he's been a Christian the whole time without any wobbles, and he wants to tell us about it. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. If you didn't know, the right way we should be thinking about the war is in Christian terms. And we're going to interrogate this claim today on the reality show. I've got Marco, Richard, and Jonathan with me. How's it going, everyone?
Good, thank you. Thank you.
It's day 188 of the war. Now, for anyone who blissfully doesn't follow Tucker Carlson's content, a few days ago on his Twitter show, which he launched after he left Fox, he interviewed a Palestinian Christian pastor from the West Bank. And it's an interesting interview, let's say, interesting in a very specific sense. And we're going to play some clips from that and just talk about what we think about it. But before we go to the clips, guys, was there any general impressions that you had about Tucker, his perspective, or what the guest had to say? Mark and Richard, or
I'll
Jonathan, go
just
on.
jump in by saying, it's what's, the so-called right is so much more frightening to me now than the left in America, because they're the ones ostensibly who hold up whatever remnants of capitalism there is. To see those who would normally say that they are defenders of capitalism, industry, reason, as absolutely committed to the arbitrary as Tucker Carlson is, makes me much more frightened than anything that the political left could do, at least in this country.
Mark and
Yeah,
Richard?
and let's remember Tucker Carlson is our least favorite dictator's friend, Putin's friend. He went to Moscow to interview his mate and let him say whatever he wanted and give him a platform, effectively. So, and now, just to make his point, which is effectively don't give money to Israel, he is now trying to leverage the Christian sentiment. And doing this, he reveals himself like a total dope, knowing very little about his own country, despite wanting to protect it so much, and not knowing very much about Christianity as well. But we'll see what keeps going.
I mean, this interview is all about the standard Tucker quizzical frown, the vacuous glare that he always offers. It's about him saying, I'm shocked at the truth I'm revealing, but he's not really shocked, and it's not really truth, and he's not revealing anything except his own stupidity and his own appeal to tribalism, which we'll see throughout this piece.
Yes, I'm surprised in a way over the last few years about the way there's been a real decline on the right. And I think a lot of people felt that they needed to take a kind of refuge amongst the right because the left was pushing a kind of secular religion, and the right, at least in the UK certainly, and I think to some extent the US, yeah, the religiosity was there, but it was nascent in some ways, and there were better elements on the right. And yet, the right's answer has been to take more and more refuge in old-fashioned religion in opposition to this secular religion. And it's strange the perspective that comes through in this interview that we'll see is that the focus in the war, not only for the war in Israel, but the war in Ukraine, should be how is this affecting Christians? As if that's the obvious, intuitive, or proper perspective one should have. But okay, well, let's go to the first clip, Daniel.
Roll.
But again, not a word. But what about Gaza? What about the entire region in the Middle East, where, of course, there's very intense fighting going on? Many Christian churches in the United States, particularly evangelical churches, support that. But there is virtually never a word about the Christians who live there, the ancient Christian community in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel proper. So because no one has said a word, there has been great suffering among the Christian population in that region. In October, a Greek Orthodox church in the Gaza Strip was hit by an airstrike. We're showing the video now. The church is in ruins. At least 17 people were killed that day. And again, that was hardly the first time that fighting in that region killed Christians. You'll remember the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem almost 20 years ago, where a clergyman was killed in the church with American weapons, and Christian clergy in our country said nothing. And you may be asking yourself, well, wait a second, if Christian leaders won't stand up for the lives of Christians, why have them in the first place? And that's probably a good question. So you would think that in
I mean, why have Christian leaders in the first place? I don't know if that's the reason why you should wonder whether you have them or why you have them. Jonathan, what do you think about his perspective? Because I think this is in effect where he's laying the groundwork for how he's thinking about the war. So what do you think about this first bit?
Oh, it's like the more times you mention the word Christian, I guess the more legitimacy you give to whatever argument you're making. I mean, Morgan alluded to it. I mean, this is Tucker's kind of modus operandi, that kind of wide-eyed stare. I'm just asking questions. I'm just asking questions about the complete arbitrary, and I liken Tucker Carlson to a supermarket tabloid at this point, completely devoid of reason, completely divorced from reality, and arbitrary. I mean, Dr. Peikoff and Miss Rand talk, I remember Dr. Peikoff on one of his podcasts saying, the arbitrary has no standing. And that's so much of what I consider when Tucker asks a question is, simply arbitrary. There's no connection to reality. And Seth Meyers, actually, the comedian, I think lampooned that pretty well. Tucker's whole, I'm just asking questions. Seth Meyers said, you can't say for certain? Well, then please, by all means, put that on television. And it seems exactly what Tucker's doing. In fact, I thought Dan Crenshaw, who is a politician here in the United States, I'm not a fan of his politics, but I think he had a really great response that I definitely want to go through. We won't go through it right now, but this is what Tucker is. He said he's a click chaser. He wants to keep people talking about him, which is exactly what we and most of the so-called people on the right, our friends in capitalism, are doing.
Marco Richard.
Indeed. I mean, if you're a religious person watching this, please buckle your seatbelt, because you're going to learn lots of stuff. It doesn't matter which kind of ghost you believe in. Jonathan there mentioned the arbitrary. What does that mean? The arbitrary is an assertion for which there is no proof. And God and whatever ghost you believe in is one of them. So any foundation on any claim of knowledge based on that, first of all, is not knowledge, because it's based on the arbitrary. And second, it's not going to lead you anywhere. The thing that really makes me laugh, and that Carlson is trying to make the connection between the ancient Christians in the Middle East and this guy, and goes to interview a guy who's from a cult of Christianity called Lutheran Evangelical Lutheran Church of Christ, or whatever, which in itself has got nothing to do with the original Christians, because if anybody knows how Christianity was invented by the Romans, my people, if we're talking collectivist, tribalist terms, just read James Valiant's book, Creating Christ. That's going to give you a couple of clues of how the whole racket was invented. But certainly rely on somebody who's actually a Protestant, stuff invented about 1600 years after. Kind of doesn't fit the narrative. But who cares? As Jonathan said, you just want to sell.
Well, it isn't like, most people are not historical scholars like James are, or, following necessarily events in the Middle East. So, all they hear a little bit probably is, God damn it, the US is at it again. They're in bed with Israel, just killing people, targeting Christians, so they're just left with that distrust, that anxiety, that fear. The fact is, Israel does not target Christians. The US does not target Christians. This is completely arbitrary. And but that's, I think, that sense of, oh, hey, I'm just asking questions. Why is it there's so many churches getting bombed? Well, Dan Crenshaw actually, answers that. He says, try answering some of these questions objectively. Tucker doesn't do that. Just plants that little seed and then walks off and collects the clicks, just like a supermarket tabloid.
Yeah. It's certainly an arbitrary focusing on the Christians, but it's a calculated omission of all the other elements involved, isn't it? It's a calculated omission of Hamas. It's a calculated omission of hostages and of everything that's led up to this. It's just an appeal to collectivism, to seeing the world through a collective lens, And that's what Tucker's doing. And it's also what the guy he's interviewing is doing, who says throughout this piece, he said almost every phrase begins with, as a Palestinian and as a Christian. And that's what sets out his stall every time. And that's hugely revealing.
Can I just quickly jump in too to say that I don't find objectivists like that at all. I never hear objectivists say, well, we've got to defend him or help him. He's another objectivist. Objectivists have fundraisers all the time. Some I help, some I don't. I don't like many objectivists. And in fact, I remember Dr. Peikoff once saying, it doesn't matter to him if somebody describes him or herself as an objectivist. It means nothing to him. He values it. So, but as you said, Richard, it's all about that collectivist. As a Christian, everything has to be through that total collectivist perspective as a Christian. And by the way, who runs Bethlehem? It ain't Israel.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And basically, I think what people should take away is that it's really weird to think about a war like this, unless you're talking about the Crusades. If we were back in the day and we were doing our, I don't know, whatever the equivalent commentary would be at the time in a church or something about whether the Crusades were just, yeah, maybe you think about the Crusades because they were explicitly religious wars to promote Christianity. But what does Christianity have to do with this war at all, particularly? And why does it matter whether Christians are having a hard time? There's no consideration of whether Israel is justified in doing what they're doing in terms of making strikes upon the enemy that's trying to destroy them. Tucker's whole perspective is, look, this is I think he even says it in one of the clips. This is making life hard for the Christians, and not a single dollar should go to the Israeli government if what they're doing is impinging upon a Christian's ability to go and worship. So why on earth is that relevant? And we'll see this guy. We covered a few months ago a Christian church in the West Bank. I think it's this guy's church, which portrayed a nativity scene covered in rubble to protest what Israel was doing. And I think it's this guy who was behind that. The point being to say that if Jesus were born today, he would be born underneath the rubble. Therefore, the argument, I guess, is that Israel is unjust in pursuing its airstrikes. And the whole perspective is ridiculous. And I think that'll come out in the clips. But let's go to the second one, Daniel. This one's a bit long, so we'll pause it about halfway through.
So what sort of support have you had from the Christians in the U.S. Congress? And just to frame this, and of course, people know this already, but the United States government is paying for a lot of these military operations, and this is a majority Christian country. So have any members of Congress sent you aid of any kind, words of support, a fellow Christian?
We've always had a problem with American foreign policy when it comes to Palestine, Israel, and the Middle East in general. I've traveled to DC in December to advocate for a ceasefire. I don't think war solves anything. And no, I mean, on the opposite, we continue to be horrified by what we hear from Congress, with, of course, some exceptions. There are some on the Democratic side. Of course, Rashida Tlaib comes from a Palestinian heritage. But when you look at the so-called religious right, we receive no sympathy whatsoever. Sometimes we just plead to be heard and to have our perspective taken seriously. And one of the things I'm often struck with, whether when I speak to diplomats, politicians, Congress staff, or even pastors and influential pastors, is how little they know about the reality on the ground. And their knowledge of the situation here seems to be very, very shallow. Yet they hold very strong opinions. And oftentimes these opinions are shaped by political parties' position, the United States position, and not really based on, a learned opinion that's based on facts, on being here, visiting, talking, investigating, and knowing the facts. And to me, the problem with all of that is it comes across with very strong opinions and decisions that impact our lives. Many times I wish to tell not just the congressmen, but the pastors themselves who support them, do you know that your lobbying, your positions, even your sermons, have direct consequences on our lives? Tucker, in this war, there was pastors who openly called, for example, to turn Gaza into a parking lot.
Let's just
Now,
pause it there.
let's remember.
And so, well, I want to hear what you guys think, but what I find interesting is how early on he refers to, I think, if I'm getting her name right, is it Rashida Tlaib, who is on the American left, on the left of the Democratic Party. And I think if she's who I'm thinking of is a Muslim. And what's strange about Tucker hosting this guy and the perspective you're getting is you're getting the American right, who Tucker's a representative of, hosting the pro-Palestinian perspective, even praising someone who normally you would think he would be critical of. Yet and the pretense for this being justified is it's just filtered through a Christian perspective, which I think is just utterly bizarre. Jonathan, what did you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, and they joined the libertarians who, the common thread I think through all of them is that I believe that they are America haters. America in the sense of the fundamental ideas of America. The thing that comes to my mind is the hilarity of the collar, the Christian collar. With all respect, it reminds me very much. Remember this thing when Tom Cruise was given the Scientology medal and he wore it so proudly? I mean, it's like such a fake appeal to authority. Well, you've got to defer to, and this guy knows what he's talking about. He's wearing like probably a $3 or $4 collar that you can get on eBay or Amazon or whatnot like that. Tucker's whole perspective, once again, as the boys mentioned, is all about religion and faith. And, well, America is majority Christian, so that means ... or this, and no comment on actually what's going on with the war itself and why this war is being prosecuted and what's the morality of it. And, again, if you were just a casual listener, you would walk away saying, U.S. is up to it again. U.S. and those greedy Israelites, ... parentheses, the greedy Jews, the industrial complex. I mean, you get all of that conspiracy theory bullshit. And, it reminds me, again, I made a few other notes. It reminds me very much of Dr. Peikoff's notion of keeping an open mind versus an active mind. Remember him making this distinction that keeping an open mind means like your mind is open to anything, any suggestion, anything. I believe he said, put that down. You want to keep an active mind, but Tucker doesn't do that. As Dan Crenshaw said, he uses his platform to sow doubt and paranoia and false narratives. And Rand actually wrote about this in The Pole Peddlers. The intellectuals don't care to look at foreign policy too closely. And I won't read the whole thing. I'll encourage you to read the article, but basically it leaves a vacuum, as she said, for anyone to fill. And that's what really horrifies me, is that this intellectual vacuum is being filled by really the most anti-American ideas. Forget even Israel hating, just hating the West, hating the protection of Western ideals. And I think Tucker knows better. I mean, when I first came to know him, he was pretty much what we would call a libertarian, a small markets, a free markets, small government kind of guy. So, I think Crenshaw's right. He does this for attention and clicks. And it's just so shameful that it's not Dr. Brooke or Nikos who is the hot young voice that the real radical voice that people are turning to.
Malcolm, Richard.
It's quite tragic how Carlson decided to talk about how the fund, say something like the war is funded by America, effectively. America is a majority country. Well, may I refer you to the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, 1791. Congress shall make no law to establish a religion or stop the worship either way. He knows this, but he ignores it. He paints America as a Christian country, totally ignoring the fact that America was founded by deists, people who didn't believe in God, but they believe in natural rights of man, the intrinsic right of human beings. But he needs to make the point that Christians are under attack. and therefore Christians must intervene. He's trying to rally the Christians, the Nazi-Christian on the right in America, and trying to put pressure on the American government to stop funding the war defense in Israel. And he doesn't care. Christians right now are just useful idiots at the moment. They're just the tool they needs to in order to push forward the policy he prefers. But this, of course, ignores the fact that yes, Christians are affected by the war in the Middle East. But hang on a second, Christians in Gaza and under the Palestinian Authority rule, are they really free to do what they want? I mean, we are talking about people living in a theocracy that doesn't allow individual rights. So at any point, the government of the PA or Hamas could turn around and destroy them and kill them. So do you want to live in those kind of conditions? And is the fact...
As against Israel, right? I mean, which is, you know, in my experience, open to different religions, you know, plurality, it's a free... This is essentially a free country in which all different types of religions are celebrated, exact opposite of what Tucker seems now to be defending.
Exactly. And the Israeli constitution actually talks about freedom of worship. So, you know, there's no way that Israel is the country that needs defending. And every attempt by anyone in the West to divert attention from who's the real victim here, Israel, attacked continuously by all the Islamic theocracies around it. He's just trying to destroy Israel. He's just trying to play the Islamic game, really.
And I think your mention there, Jonathan, of the pull peddlers is relevant, because that's what this reverend does throughout this piece, is he bemoans the lack of political pull that he is getting from what he sees as a source of income and support from American religious people. That's what he's crying out for. It's worth stressing that he, at one point in the interview, and I'm not sure whether we got it in the clip or not, but it's for context, it's worth saying that he states that there are between 800 and 900 Christians in Gaza. So we are really talking tiny, tiny, tiny. So that is hugely relevant when he's saying that this should be what sets an agenda, and he's calling for the brotherhood of Christians everywhere to come out and support this group that, let's face it, is so small, not because of Israel, but because of Hamas and because of who runs Gaza and who has run Gaza since 2005.
Yeah, Morgan, please. No.
So the thing that always, I guess, strikes me about Tucker is the sense that whilst I don't know that he's always been brilliant, there's been something of a decline. And if you go watch, I think it's on C-SPAN, I want to say back in 2004 or something, Christopher Hitchens is there for like a 2-hour interview. And they ask him, who are your favorite like figures, commentators, writers on the right nowadays? And he names like William Safire and people like that. And then he says, there's this brilliant young guy, Tucker Carlson, who I think is a really brilliant writer, and I think it's a shame that he's going more and more to broadcast media and all this kind of stuff. And I just think, what would Hitchens, if were he still alive today, make of what Tucker's doing and the decline that Tucker has gone through? I mean, he would presumably take that back very, very quickly, I would have to think. And Jonathan, I mean, you've been a regular appearance on Fox for a while, and you mentioned there that you came to know Carlson a bit. What's your sense of him having a bit of a decline?
I didn't know him personally, but I was on, panels, etc., with him quite a bit. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. What's disheartening to me is that, our ideas now, ideas of capitalism, individualism, are seen as so far outside the box and so implausible, and yet people like Carlson, and I think I think it's transactional. I think he sees a market in, and like the game has been upped now in the sense of trying to get attention, that you have to be more and more shocking, and to couch it all behind that religious faith. I feel like I noticed Candace Owens doing this a lot now, and I try to avoid all of these people, but like Candace Owens, it seems like every other word out of her mouth now is Christ is king, Christ is king, Christ is king. And like, it's like a little thing, kind of like wearing the collar to say, this gives me legitimate authority because it's religious. And I feel the same way with rabbis. People tell me they're a rabbi, doesn't mean shit to me, excuse my French. I don't give them more moral authority, less moral. Let's hear what you have to say. So I hate the way that religion is really used like that, as some type of moral authority. Well, he's a priest. He's speaking for whatever. I mean, he's speaking under terrible premises is what he's speaking. If he's taking it seriously, he's speaking under terrible premises. And, one saying I've been trying to get on a bumper sticker. I don't know if people even do bumper stickers anymore, but you heard it here first. The more religious, the more suspicious. The more people rely on something to do with faith, something to do with mysticism, the more dismissive and suspicious I am of whatever comes out of their mouth. And this guy's the best example, and Tucker as well.
Sure. And the only people who should be wearing dog collars are the dogs in Jonathan's book.
Well, and I will say, shameless promotion, you mentioned that, where are the individualist ideas in politics or in political discussion? Now, they're it's like what collectivist group you're part of. That's exactly what Rand, of course, talked about in Textbook of Americanism, basic issue in the political world, individualism versus collectivism. And who else talks about individualism at all, save objectivists? That's why we're here.
Yeah. And what you see this reverend do a lot in this piece, with his unearned prestige of his position, is call for effects without being willing to initiate the causes. So he's asking for peace. He's asking for solutions to the problem, as if they're floating things that can just emerge without first enacting the necessary cause, the defeat of Hamas.
Like Bonnie, who is a great YouTube member, Bonnie says, Carlson is getting ready for Trump, just like Trump and his Bible. Remember Trump standing there with that famous shot of brandishing that Bible, so proud of holding up that Bible. And I look at that and I think, do you really see objectivists doing that very frequently, holding up Atlas Shrugged? Even no, they're doing things like, Blake building a new aircraft. They're actually accomplishing something. They're not hiding behind that false authority of a religious book. You hold up the Bible and somehow you gain authority. I think it's deserved.
And I think just before we go to finish the clip, the reference to Rashida Khalid just again snakes by unquestioned by Tucker. And again, it's someone who in other contexts at other times he would have been quite critical of. And certainly in commentary here in the UK, there are journalists who are Christian to varying degrees, of strength, who will be very critical of Islam and of Islamic precepts kind of infiltrating our society is kind of how they'll phrase it. And yet I'll see them at other times when they're asked about kind of the importance of religious morality to a society, and they'll openly kind of make an appeal to Muslims in society, saying that, under the harsh storm of secularism, we all need to band together. And there is that kind of perspective coming from Carlson here, I think. And it's very sinister because, and even like if you think about the Daily Wire, which is run by Ben Shapiro, who is most certainly the better figure there. He's basically a kind of Orthodox Jewish person to some degree. And he employs all these quite strong Christians. And in other contexts, they would be at each other's throats. And yet they'll band together to advocate their version of politics. Whereas if they were successful in defeating the left, so to say, then they would suddenly become enemies of each other. So when it's expedient, the religious will band together, even though actually their real kind of goals aren't properly in alignment. And that people should think that something stinks that's off. But all right, let's just finish this clip, Daniel.
There are not just, the many innocent people, the majority of, Gaza people, civilians, innocent children, but also there are our siblings in Christ. We have relatives and friends in Gaza, and here you have a pastor with influence calling for the total destruction of Gaza. And you definitely, you heard in the beginning the segment from Congressman Wahlberg, who is previously a pastor, went to prestigious evangelical institutes, and it makes us wonder, you know, this obsession with love and with war, I mean, this obsession with war and violence, it's the antithesis of everything that Jesus taught. And at the same time, it again makes us wonder, do you realize how damaging that is for us Christians living not just in Palestine, but in the Middle East? Damaging in the sense of real impact on our lives, but also damaging in terms of our credibility in front of our peers here in the Middle East. So we've always had a very serious problem when it comes to American foreign policy and the religious right support to that foreign policy when it comes to Palestine and Israel.
So what you get coming from the pastor there, it isn't even a kind of just war perspective that we were speaking about recently, which is at its base a Christian theory, but is a kind of concession to the necessity of going to war. Really, what he seems to be saying is you shouldn't be going to war at all because that contradicts Christ's teachings. So it's really a pacifism, which is saying that Israel shouldn't be doing this anyway, and America shouldn't be helping them in any respect, morally or financially. And yet that is just preaching non-resistance to evil, which is an evil perspective all the way down. Good people should resist evil and should go to war when it's necessary. But before we go on to the other ones, what did you think about just the end part of that clip, Jonathan?
So like what you said, Morgan, I mean, what justice demands is retaliating against those unspeakable atrocities of October 7th. You didn't hear this pastor talk about that at all. You know, he talks about Israel's obsession with war. I mean, I guess we'll have to bleep this out, but like, what the fuck is he talking about? I mean, the Palestinians are the ones that are literally, you see this tape of them training these young kids to run around with guns. And, you know, I mean, this is part of their whole world from when they're young. And, you know, that's not the case with Israel at all. So, justice demands not just a swift response, but I believe a total response. We've talked about John David Lewis's book before, in terms of what a proper military response would be. But Morgan, you're right. I mean, turning the other cheek, that is classic Christianity. And all that does is get the other cheek blown off. And why should we be martyrs for the worst evil in the world that, you know, would kill any one of these folks that are so eager to defend them?
Mark or Richard?
And when Tucker's summarizing this position, he says, and I quote, "Christianity is not the religion of Nagasaki and Hiroshima." Talk about missing all the essentials of self-defense and the necessity for Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the necessity for what the Israelis are doing in terms of defending their country against Hamas. But that's how Tucker sees it, and this is the fact that it's this simplistic, polarized. I think at one point, I think it's the pastor who says we should avoid a simplistic polarization of good and evil. Well, if you do that and you opt for the pacifism that you're talking about, then the Islamic fundamentalists are going to pounce on that, and that pacifism will lead to your annihilation. So you'll still be raising the fist at Israel, no doubt, at that point, but it won't be Jews that kill you. It will be Hamas and Hezbollah, etc. For them not to see this and for them to omit all of those Islamic elements from the context here, particularly when he's discussing reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is an incredibly selective reality, isn't it? I don't think he's seeing beyond his own church at this point, quite literally.
And the tragedy of this is that the irrationality unleashed by Hamas and the Islamic ideology behind it cannot be fought off with more irrationality with a Christian flavor. You have to reach a point where you realize that the action that you take have got consequences. And if you take an action because your God tells you to do it, well, then you don't need morality in the first place, because you just do what you've been ordered. You're a little slave to a ghost. So you don't need to look at reality and react to it. You're just a puppet. But the pastor actually by accident says something right. He blames the US foreign policy. It is true. The US foreign policy is the problem because it's an altruistic foreign policy. If you would like to know what the US foreign policy should be, an objectively rational one, read the essay on this book by Ayn Rand, one of the last essays that talks about how a foreign policy for America should be. A foreign policy where you put American interests ahead of anything else. So, things like Vietnam War, for example, totally useless and altruistic war. And you should all rally to protect Israel in this conflict, because Israel is your ally, is your outpost of civilization in the Middle East. If you lose Israel, if you allow the savages to win, then you find yourself fighting with a bigger, larger group of Islamic assailants. So you find much more irrationality to deal with. You're not going to be able to cope with that. It's in your interest. If Tucker is such a patriot that cares so much about America, then he should realize where the interest of America lies. It's not about supporting the enemy of Israel through aid and other goodwill and altruistic ways, but it's actually helping Israel to survive.
And go listen to what Miss Rand told Phil Donahue, or I believe Tom Snyder, on those respective shows about why she supported Israel. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, she's saying she had never donated, I guess, to a country before or to a war effort, but she did in Israel's case, as I recall her mentioning. So, she was an adamant supporter of it. And I'll mention one more too, just going back to the tape, and I know we have another clip to run, like that religious imagery as like a means of persuasion. I'm thinking, like, where have I seen this stuff before? Like, well, I try to avoid it, but if you've ever seen Mike Lindell, you know who this guy is? He's got his, and you can see the cross built right into his, imagery there. Again, a right winger. And then the same thing with, if you know who Steve Bannon is, he's got Christ right there. So it's always that subliminal bullshit authority that you can trust this person, they're speaking the truth, and we've always talked about with voting, people vote on their morals. They act based on what they think is truly right. And that fake appeal to authority with religion is exactly what Tucker does, I guess, all throughout that's what his career now is.
Yes, and well, I have a few more things to say, but we're just coming to the last part of the show, so let's run through the last clips, Daniel.
Middle East.
That's the sad irony of all of this, is that a lot of the money that comes from churches, even before the war, goes not just to the Israeli military, but to the building of settlements. Many of these settlements are built on land confiscated from Palestinians, and in many cases from Palestinian Christian families. So I hope you understand again how difficult this is for us, because this is political and financial support from our siblings in Christ, rather than that support helping us or even helping humanitarian causes or peace causes or initiatives to bring Palestinians and Israeli together. It's supporting initiatives that are causing our lives as a Christian community more and more difficult, and causing many of us to leave because it seems that there is no future for us in this land.
Sorry, let's go straight to the next one, because I forgot that last bit was there.
As Middle Eastern Christians in general.
It's very obvious to me that many evangelical leaders in the United States care much more about the highly secular government of Israel than they care about Christian communities in the Middle East. Why do you have a guess as to why that would be?
Some of it is theology. Some of it is the theology of Christian Zionism that teaches, for example, that Christians must support Israel because the Bible teaches that. And oftentimes that is part of a larger theology of the end times, in which they view the presence of Jews in the land as preparing for the second coming of Christ. They see it as a fulfillment of prophecy, not realizing again what that means on the ground. I always say it's as if the land was empty to them. They are excited about certain events without understanding the consequences of these events on real lives. The irony is that many of these positions actually believe, and many evangelical leaders believe, that at the end times and after Jews are gathered in Palestine, 2/3 of them will be massacred, and only for the other third to convert to Christianity. And somehow they consider that a Jewish-friendly theology. Don't get me wrong, I am for Christians and Jews, just like I'm for all religions coming together, understanding one another. But there is something very problematic when we make a certain religious group as an object in our theology and even eschatology and relate to them accordingly, again, without really understanding what is happening on the ground, without understanding even the complexity of Israel as a state, how secular it is, but even how much it is oppressing Palestinians, breaking the international law, committing sometimes, human rights abusing, documented against Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians. To me, Christians should be for peace. And again, I wish you were investing all of this energy and money in initiatives that bring peace, not continuing to support Israel unconditionally without holding them accountable, which is, in my opinion, what drove us to this mess right now, with the catastrophe of thousands of Palestinians killed and October 7 and all of that. It's all of these policies, and
yeah, it's all the Jews' fault. Long story short, blame the Jews and the Americans. Blame the West.
Yeah, there was some meat in the middle there, but notice just the way that clip's book ended. Carlson's asking a question: why do American Christians want to support the highly secular Israeli government instead of supporting the Christian population there? And then at the end, the pastor says outrageously that the victims of October 7th, was it Palestinian Christians or something that he said, something like that? I mean, just completely a bizarre perspective on what October 7th was. And a suspicion from Carlson, like, why would you support this secular government? Again, as if that should be what you care about in terms of supporting a government that's been attacked and a country and a people that have been attacked. And I think in a sense, the raison d'etre for this interview is we're going to present the pro-Palestinian side, but instead of it coming from a Palestinian Muslim or like a Marxist-Leninist from the PLO back in the day, this is going to be easier to put over on people because it's coming from a Christian perspective. And so that the Christians in Carlson's audience aren't going to be so suspicious of it because it's not coming from someone in a headdress or wearing Muslim garb and so on. And I think it's just a disgusting interview. But what did you guys make of that clip, Mark and Richard?
Well, what strikes is a level of evasion from both sides. Carlton doesn't seem to be much there in the first place. All he wants somebody that blames Israel for whatever reason. But this priest guy is like, well, first of all, he's a bit confused because he's talking about Israel is protected by the Christians because it's in the Bible. Well, let me remind you that it's a Christian that caused the diaspora in the whole of Europe. Effectively, they prosecuted Jews continuously throughout the last 2,000 years. It's the Christian that came up with a blood libel. It's the Christian that chased them and imprisoned them. And, the Nazis were Christians, weren't they? They caused the Holocaust. They murdered 6 million of them. So what's the story about? And also, the way he ignores the facts on the ground, the facts of the last 6 months, that Hamas, an Islamic Muslim fundamentalist group, attacked a bunch of innocent Israeli. They invaded Israel. They killed over 1,000 people, 1,200 people, and they kidnapped 200 odd people, part of whom are still there. still held hostage by the people in Gaza, but the same Palestinian who, poor things, are suffering so much. If they wanted to stop suffering, they could just hand over the hostages. They're still there. And the great Christian pastor doesn't really care about the victims. He doesn't even mention them. And even when he talks about, oh, this event has been caused by these things is causing Palestinian killed. Oh, by the way, and October 7, he finally sprung to his mind that the whole origin of this war is actually the action of the Gazans.
I find this quite interesting, this interview, quite telling, because apparently I've got it all wrong. I've totally misunderstood this conflict. Apparently this is a conflict between Christianity and secularism. How could I miss that fact up until now? Because the mission of Islam in this, the mission when he's talking about converting people, is Islamism that insists on people convert or die. It's not Jews who are doing that, is it? And if you just simply look at the words that he uses during the course of this interview and the words that he admits, he manages to include the words of Nakba, genocide, apartheid, siege, Zionism. Those are all included. Words not included: Hamas, hostages, tunnels, human shields, Islam. That alone blows it all apart.
We've done a lot of programming and a lot of shows about, the so-called innocents and victims in war. Miss Rand, wrote about that. And, if there are people who are victims, they're victims not of Israel. They're victims of Hamas. They're victim of the Palestinians who elected and keep these people in power. As you said, someone could rat out where some of these hostages are. You could see some. You don't see any of that, and you see their intellectual leaders, as you mentioned, Robert, basically just stirring them on. My only kind of saving grace here is that I do think that Tucker's going to end up like O'Reilly, Morton Downey Jr. I'm dating myself with that one. Glenn Beck, Ed Schultz, Michelle Malkin. Just as Dan Crenshaw said, he will fade away into nothingness. I think this is that really cynical last dash for clicks, but I do think a great read after you finish with this program is the Ayn Rand Institute's Alternative to Conspiracism's Foolish Illusions, which is a great piece that actually talks about a lot of when Miss Rand talked about conspiracy theorists in particular, and a lot of great reading on her perspective on this as well. So things to keep in mind as you consider the source.
Yes. And Marco, you mentioned the Nazis being Christian, and I always keep an eye out for the thing that's going to set people alight in the comments that isn't really to do with the meat of the episode, but just to pour petrol on that. The Nazis made the Concordat with the Catholic Church, and right up until the end, the SS Guards' belts read "Gott mit uns," which means God with us. So just for all the people who are going to get really annoyed about that, you can just be even more annoyed. All right, let's go to the final clip, Daniel.
And this shows that American Christian support to Christians is actually conditioned by where you stand on the political spectrum. It's not as if if Christians were hit or targeted or persecuted by someone who's not an ally, then you will see an outrage. But because Israel is an ally to America, no one cares about Christians being targeted. In fact, in the Catholic Church, 2 elderly women were killed by snipers, by Israeli snipers. And the Catholic Church talked about it. There were official statements from the Patriarch, saying that it was Israeli snipers who killed the 2 women in the vicinity of the church, in front of the church. They were leaving the church to go from one building to the other. They were killed, shot. And when people tried to rescue them, they were also shot at, and 7 were wounded. This happened again. And how can this be a mistake, Tucker? That's our question, because they were in the middle of the church. And to add to all of this already tragic situation, those people in Gaza we talked to, almost all of them told us that their homes have already been destroyed by the Israeli bombings. So now, if they survive this war, and it's a big if, we hope they do, there's nowhere left for them to go. where will they end? I mean, they're begging us, can you get us out? Of course, we're helpless here. What can we do other than pray and try to send some financial support to them so that they can buy food? And right now,
Yes, and when he mentions the destroyed homes there, I don't know if you saw it, Tucker goes wide-eyed, slack-jawed, as he is for most of the interview. But look, I mean, I guess what I'd say just about this interview in general is just, no disrespect meant to people who are in a state of suffering, but so what? Because the perspective in this interview is not, is Israel justified in doing what they're doing? Were any people who were killed in churches collaterally killed? Were Hamas, who don't exactly have a sense of honor about other religions, were they using churches as bases of operations and so on? None of those questions are asked. It's just taking carte blanche that, look, these people were killed, this church was destroyed, therefore, axiomatically, Israel's in the wrong. And worst of all, Israel is a highly secular government. Now, unfortunately, actually, there is the religious right taking part in Israel's government at the moment. But I suppose because that's the Jewish right, that doesn't really matter to them. But what did you guys make of this final clip or any general takeaways about the interview?
It's quite shocking. I mean, this guy is, first of all, is obsessed with money. He must have mentioned money 5 or 6 times. His worry is not going to get his money for his church and his money for his pious work and all this kind of crap. And of course, on the other side, Tucker is obsessed with money in the sense that he doesn't want to give money to Israel to defend itself. He doesn't want America to pay for its own interest. But that's just pathetic, really. Using Christianity as the excuse to advance their own policy is just sad. And you mentioned the secularity of Israel, and that's exactly the fact. It's a secular state that makes it a legitimate state, a state which is concerned in the protection of the individual who lives in the state. If Israel were a state in virtue of its religiosity, in virtue of the fact that Jews have got a right because they are Jews, that would make it an illegitimate state. That would put it morally on the same level as the Islamic attackers. But Israel is not. Israel is a civilized place where people have individual rights. And again, that's why Tucker is totally wrong in trying to undermine Israel's defense.
This isn't an interview. It's a platform for somebody who wants to surrender to terrorism for the sake of peace. Like surrender to the bully for the sake of not being bullied today, but being bullied again tomorrow, for encouraging other bullies to bully you in the future. That's what's avoided here. And the naivety is astonishing. I mean, we know that Hamas do things like dress up as medical workers, use ambulances to move equipment and militants and terrorists around. You think they don't occasionally dress as a priest or dress as in a burqa or whatever, and they do all sorts of things to conceal their identity. Simply because you say you're a Christian doesn't give you an automatic pass to go unchecked through checkpoints or not have permits when you're moving from one area to the other, when there are terrorists who can exploit that and do exploit that kind of thing. So the naivety there just speaks volumes about how he's not looking at the ground reality himself.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, I mean, I hear that a lot in America now on the right, that they don't like the funding they don't want the funding, they don't want to spend the money. And I think, well, if you just even offered a semi-full-throated support of Israel, maybe you would need to spend the money. If there was that real commitment to Israel needs to completely destroy and dismantle all threats towards it, and just that vocal and philosophical support, you wouldn't need, I don't think, that much money. I mean, Razi has talked at great lengths about how this war could have been over many, many months ago if it had been prosecuted properly. It's not been. It's been a complete altruist celebration since the get-go. Unfortunately, that's prolonged it, and it's once again kind of demonstrates the power of ideas. And the more mystical, the more faith-based, which is Carlson's whole modus operandi now, I think the more suspect and the more arbitrary and more to be dismissed.
Yeah, the biggest conspiracy theories going that need to be exposed are religions, based on irrationality, based on unreason, and what they lead and promote people to do. That's what needs to be exposed. So if Tucker really wanted to reveal the conspiracy theories, that's what he should go for, not promote one.
And you cannot vanquish the bad ideas of Islam with the bad ideas of Christianity. You need an objective and rational, reality-based philosophy.
Yes, and unfortunately, as I said, there's this decline in the right going on, and even people on the right who are themselves atheists or are secular increasingly want to take that shelter in religion. Now, it's perhaps less surprising that Carlson is becoming increasingly religious as time goes on, but in this, and because the whole, in a sense, rationale for why they're doing that is because if you look at Ayn Ali's article that came out a few months ago, is because the left and the Islamists are very terrifying, and they have this whole nice little package narrative, and that by being secular, you don't have that same narrative, or in a sense, that same kind of moral basis. And so you'll see people like Ayn Ali, although I wouldn't typically think of her as someone on the right, trying to take that shelter in religion. Someone who's better, I think in many ways, certainly better on Israel, like Douglas Murray, who, although he is himself an atheist, taking shelter amongst Christianity and Christian messaging. People, even internet commentators like Sargon of Akkad, if people remember him, although he put up a video the other day saying that even though he is still an atheist and doesn't believe in God, it's a tragedy, the decline of Christianity in our society and all this stuff. And so until people have a really articulated philosophy, and primarily I think moral philosophy, which is really where the rubber hits the road for a lot of these people, they will continue. We'll see this decline continuing, and they'll look not just for any religion, but the religion which is most familiar and most traditional, which in the West for a lot of people is Christianity, and we'll see this anti-justice perspective coming through, because ultimately, although the Christians won't accept this, that is what their religion. That's the whole perspective of their religion. That's what it's in favor of. Any closing comments, just as we're in the final 2 minutes, guys? Or should we wrap up?
I'll just say, I mean, there's a comment from Miss Rand. I don't remember exactly where I heard it, broadcast or speech somewhere, and her comment is, "You speak of faith, I have none." I love that. It's like she just dismisses, this is my interpretation, I just dismisses any appeal to faith, appeal to mysticism, justification via mysticism. And that's exactly what I heard from Tucker. And unfortunately, those on the right, I mean, we've made so many efforts to try to kind of connect with those on the so-called right, defenders of capitalism, so-called defenders of the West. They're not that at all. And they're being led by intellectuals like Carlson down the same alley as those on the left. Complete mysticism and complete faith and complete altruism all the while.
Yeah, and that's a problem. Belief is not knowledge. You believe something, you accept something without thinking, without verifying it. You take it as true. While if you know something, you use your brain, use your reason, you check against reality. Is this true or not? And that's the fundamental problem. If people keep thinking through beliefs, through the arbitrary, they will never get anywhere. They will never discover a morality that helps them to live life. But they will always rely on death. The next world will be always better, and they will miss the chance to live the only life that they got on this planet now.
And that's what makes objectivism a practical philosophy to live by. And that's what makes it so powerful, so useful, and so relevant, and so true.
Yes, I think anyone who feels that appeal to religion, you'll find a much greater sense of solace in thought and conviction than you will in faith and religion. Because even the
Bonnie, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but just thank you to Bonnie for a super chat as well. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, it's okay. Because if you ever listen to the religious, even they often aren't really convinced that it's true, and they have to struggle, and you don't want that. But all right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the reality show and the Daily Objective. Jonathan, where can people find you and find your books?
The new book written with Dr. Peikoff is called Can You Really Love a Dog? benevolent, heartwarming, a great gift for dog and cat lovers alike, and it's at Amazon.
Lovely. And Mark and Richard, where can people find your work?
You can check it out on the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this one. Information down below where it says shorter content. You'll find edited videos taken from all the key interviews on this channel that really distill the points down to a 2-3 minute bite-sized form, which you can share on social media and promote the message of the moral position that we're all defending here.
And you can find my Twitter and Substack in the description. As I say, thank you for watching, everyone, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.